Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that the kind, smiling man who taught your children, who coached Little League, who everyone trusted for decades, was actually a murderer. For nearly 50 years, a quiet West Virginia town believed they lived among good people, neighbors, teachers, friends. But beneath that calm surface, a dark secret was waiting to be uncovered. A crime forgotten by time, a killer hiding in plain sight, and a family who refused to stop believing that truth would one day speak again. This isn't just a story about murder, it's about patience, faith, and the power of time itself. Because sometimes the loudest justice comes after the longest silence. Stay with me, because by the end of this story you'll understand why evil can hide for years, but it can never hide forever. It was a cold, gray morning in January 2019 when 6 unmarked police cars quietly rolled into Maple Street, Huntington, West Virginia. The neighborhood was still half asleep. Porch lights flickered, coffee pots brewed, and snow crunched under the officers' boots. They didn't use sirens. They didn't shout. They just surrounded a small 2-story house that looked like every other home on the block. Inside, 78-year-old David Kowalski was pouring his morning coffee, the same way he had for nearly 5 decades. A retired teacher, a grandfather, a man everyone in town respected. He had spent his life teaching chemistry, volunteering for community events, and earning praise as a kind, intelligent neighbor. To everyone who knew him, he was the perfect example of a good man. But that morning, when the knock came at 7:32 a.m., the mask he'd worn for half a century began to crack. "David Kowalski," an officer said, "we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 1971 murder of Catherine Fitzgerald." The mug in his hand trembled. He didn't stat argue. He didn't stat ask why. He just stared, calm, quiet, and pale, as if he had been expecting this knock his entire life. Outside, neighbors peeked through curtains in disbelief. To them, this man wasn't a criminal. He was the man who fixed their fences, coached their kids, donated to charity, and waved every morning with a smile. No one could understand how their Mr. Kowalski could be part of something so dark. But justice, even when silent, never forgets. And that morning, nearly 50 years after a young woman's life was stolen in her college dorm, truth finally came knocking. Because what no one knew was that beneath the gentle face of a beloved teacher lived a secret buried in time. A secret that would take 5 decades, a grieving family's unbreakable faith, and a miracle of modern science to finally uncover. A kind face can hide a dark heart. He was the kind of man everyone trusted without a second thought. He lived in the same small town for years. People waved at him when he walked his dog. Children smiled when he passed by because he always had candy in his pocket. He coached school teams, helped students with homework, and gave speeches about honesty and hard work. To everyone, he was the perfect example of goodness, a man with wisdom, patience, and respect. But behind that friendly smile lived a truth so dark that no one could have imagined it. He had done something terrible many years ago, and every kind word he spoke, every helpful thing he did was like another layer of paint hiding a crack in the wall. The outside looked clean and bright, but deep inside it was breaking. People often think that bad people look scary, rude, or strange. But real life isn't set like that. Evil doesn't always wear black clothes or walk around with an angry face. Sometimes, evil wears a teacher's suit, shakes hands with everyone, and sits next to you in a meeting smiling politely. It can laugh with you, help you, and even comfort you, while hiding a secret that would destroy everything if it were known. For almost 5 decades, he fooled everyone. He went to weddings, funerals, graduations, and holidays. He spoke kindly of others, gave advice about living a good life, and acted like he cared deeply for his students and community. People looked at him and thought, "That's the kind of person I want my children to be." But the truth was something no one could see, not even his closest friends. That's how some people hide their darkness. They cover it with light. They do good things not because they are good inside, but because they want to make sure no one looks too closely. They create a perfect image so the world never questions them. And the more perfect they look, the safer they feel hiding behind it. That's why we must be careful about who we trust completely. It doesn't mean we should live in fear or doubt everyone, but it means we should open our eyes a little wider. Don't just believe someone's words, watch their actions. Do they treat everyone with respect, or only the people who can benefit them? Do they stay honest even when no one is watching? A truly good person doesn't need to act perfect. Their goodness shows naturally in how they speak, how they help quietly, how they stay kind even when no one gives them anything back. He, on the other hand, built his kindness like a mask. Every act of generosity was like another brick in a wall hiding what he really was. He thought if he acted like a hero long enough, the world would forget his sins. And for a while it worked. Everyone believed the lie. But lies don't last forever. One day every mask falls off. And when it does, the truth behind it can shock the world. That's what happened to him. The man who smiled at everyone, who taught lessons about honesty, was finally standing in front of police officers who knew the truth. The same calm voice that used to guide students now trembled as he heard the words that ended his act forever. This story reminds us that kindness isn't what people say, it's what they live. Real kindness doesn't need to hide anything. It doesn't need attention, praise, or rewards. And it doesn't disappear when no one is watching. So when you meet someone who seems too perfect, too charming, too flawless, pause, observe. Listen not to their words but to the silence between them. Look at how they treat people when the world isn't clapping for them. Because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who shout or threaten. They're the ones who smile gently, speak softly, and hide their darkness behind the image of goodness. Always remember, a kind face can be real, but it can also be a mask. A sweet voice can comfort you, but it can also trick you. And a person's true nature isn't shown by what they say about themselves, but by what they do when they think no one will ever find out. Time can sleep, but truth never dies. Years went by. The small town changed. New families moved in, old ones passed away, buildings were rebuilt, and the story of the young girl became just another old memory. People stopped talking about it. Newspapers stopped printing updates. Even the police files were pushed deep into dusty shelves. To many, it was like the case never existed. But time only made the surface quiet, not the truth itself. Because truth doesn't die, it just sleeps for a while. It hides behind silence, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Every secret that is buried stays alive somewhere, in a box of evidence, in a person's memory, in a single piece of forgotten proof that refuses to disappear. While the world forgot, something powerful was still at work. New detectives joined the force, new science was being created. Machines that didn't exist before were now able to read what old eyes could not see. All those years, the truth was simply waiting for people to be ready to find it. The man who did this terrible act thought he was safe. He grew old, believing his secret was gone forever. He watched the world move forward, thinking no one would ever come knocking at his door again. But time is strange. It can be slow, but it never loses its memory. What is done stays written, even if the ink fades. One small piece of evidence, a few skin cells under her fingernails, stayed preserved. It was tiny, almost invisible. For decades, no one could use it for anything. But when new science arrived, those tiny cells spoke louder than any human voice. It was as if time itself had finally opened its mouth and said, "Now it sets time for the truth." That's how life works. You can hide lies for years. You can cover them with good deeds, with respect, with success. But one day, when the world least expects it, truth rises again. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need help. It simply appears when the time is right. Many people believe that after enough years, things are forgotten forever. But time doesn't erase, it reveals. It removes the noise, the confusion, the false stories, and slowly brings the real one back to light. And when it does, it comes with full strength. For that family, those decades of silence were like a wound that never closed. Every year, they hoped for an answer. Every birthday, every holiday, every anniversary of her death, they remembered. They lived with pain while others moved on. But their patience became their victory. When the truth finally came, it was not just science that solved it. It was time and faith working together. This story shows that even when everything feels still, something unseen is always moving. Truth walks slowly, but it never gets lost. It may take years, even a lifetime, but it never disappears. And when it finally returns, it does not whisper, it roars. So never think that wrong actions are forgotten just because time passes. You may escape people's memory, but not the truth. It remembers every detail, every moment, every choice. It sleeps quietly like the calm sea before a storm. And one day when the waves rise again, everything that was hidden beneath will be seen clearly, just as it was. Guilt is a shadow that follows forever. He lived a normal life, or at least that's what everyone believed. He taught at school, smiled at people in the grocery store, waved at his neighbors, and always looked calm. He was the man who remembered birthdays, helped his students when they struggled, and gave money to local charities. To the outside world, he looked peaceful, but inside he carried a heavy secret that never let him rest. No matter how many years passed, the memory of that one night never left him. It followed him like a shadow that never disappears, no matter how bright the sun shines. He tried to live as if nothing had happened, but guilt has a way of whispering when the world goes quiet. When he closed his eyes at night, he saw the same scene. When he woke up every morning and made his coffee, it wasn't just the smell of coffee he felt, it was the smell of that night returning. Guilt is something you can wash away. It stays under your skin, inside your heart, no matter how many times you smile or pretend to be fine. He went to work every day, but part of him was still trapped in that moment from decades ago. Even when he laughed, the sound was hollow. Even when people thanked him, a voice inside whispered, "They don't know who you really are." He built his life around pretending. He thought if he did enough good things, teaching kids, helping others, acting kind, it might balance what he had done. But guilt doesn't work like that. Good deeds don't erase a sin when you haven't faced the truth. They only build a taller wall around your heart. At night, when the world slept, his mind was wide awake. He replayed that night over and over, wondering if anyone still remembered. He told himself it was buried. That time had erased it. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The only thing that time erased was people's attention, not his own conscience. Every time he heard police sirens in the distance, his heart skipped a beat. Every time there was news of a cold case being solved, he turned off the TV quickly. He smiled at the neighbors and acted normal, but inside he wondered, will today be the day they come for me? That fear, that quiet, invisible fear, was the punishment he carried every single day of his life. People think punishment starts when you're caught, but for someone carrying guilt, it starts the moment the wrong is done. It eats slowly, piece by piece. It takes away peace, sleep, and real happiness. You can hide from people, but you can't hide from your own heart. And that's the truth about guilt. It never leaves you. You can move houses, grow old, change jobs, even gain respect, but the guilt follows like a shadow that doesn't care about time or distance. He fooled everyone but not himself. Every mirror he looked into reminded him of the man he used to be and the monster he became. That's why he looked calm when police finally came for him. Because deep down he knew this moment had been chasing him all his life. For him, the sound of handcuffs was not just the sound of arrest, it was the sound of release. After so many years of silence, the truth had finally spoken. And for the first time, the weight of guilt began to lift. Not because he was forgiven, but because he was finally caught. Trust, but stay aware. She trusted him. He was her teacher, someone older, wiser, respected. He smiled kindly, helped her with her studies, and spoke to her with gentle words. To her, he was safe. Someone she could ask for advice, someone who understood her goals. She never imagined that the same person who guided her with books could one day be the reason her story ended too soon. Trust is a beautiful thing. It's what connects people, what makes us feel safe, loved, and understood. But sometimes the same trust that brings peace can also bring pain if given to the wrong person. Because not everyone who looks kind truly has a kind heart. Some people wear goodness like clothing, just something to look right on the outside. Inside, their intentions are dark, selfish, and cruel. That's why it's important to stay aware. It doesn't mean living in fear or suspecting everyone, but it means listening to that small voice inside, the one that warns you when something feels wrong. We often ignore that feeling out of politeness or guilt. We say, "He's just being nice," or maybe I'm overthinking. But that quiet voice inside is often the truth trying to protect you. She didn't see danger because he never looked like danger. He smiled, he encouraged her, he made her believe she could trust him. But his kindness was not real. It was a mask. He used her trust as his weapon. And that's what made his act even more cruel. Sometimes the people who want to harm you don't come with threats or anger. They come with comfort. They come with soft words, smiles, and care that feels safe. That's how they lower your guard. And by the time you realize it, it's too late. Being careful with trust doesn't mean closing your heart, it means protecting it wisely. You can still be kind, still believe in good people, but do it with open eyes. Watch how someone behaves when they don't get what they want. Notice how they treat people who can't benefit them. Pay attention to whether their actions match their words. Real goodness doesn't need attention. Fake goodness always needs to be seen. He gained her trust slowly, like someone building a bridge piece by piece, until she finally believed she could walk across without fear. But what she didn't know was that the bridge was weak from the start, built only to trap her on the other side. So many people in the world are hurt because they trusted the wrong person, not because they were foolish, but because they were kind. The kind people don't think like manipulators do. They see good because they have good inside them. But not everyone thinks that way, and that's what makes awareness so important. If something doesn't feel right, if words don't match actions, if someone makes you feel uncomfortable even in small ways, listen to that feeling. It's not weakness to protect yourself, it's wisdom. You can respect people, help them, and even be close to them, but always keep a little space for your safety. She never thought she was in danger because she believed that good people don't harm others. But the truth is, sometimes harm comes quietly, hidden behind kind words. It doesn't always scream, it smiles first. That's why trusting wisely is not about fear, it's about strength. Real trust is built slowly and tested by time. Fake trust comes fast and demands closeness too quickly. So move carefully. Believe in people, but not blindly. Even light can cast shadows, and not every hand that reaches out is meant to help you. In the end, her story teaches one clear truth. Trust is a gift. And like any precious gift, it should be given with care, not just with heart, but with awareness. Small clues become big voices. In the beginning, the case looked hopeless. There were no witnesses, no confessions, no clear signs of who had done it. The dorm room was quiet, almost too perfect, as if nothing had happened. But sometimes, the loudest truth is hidden in the smallest detail. On her desk, 2 coffee cups sat side by side. One had her fingerprints, the other had been wiped clean. To most people, that might have seemed like nothing, just a small clue in a room full of sadness. But that tiny detail spoke louder than anyone realized. It whispered that someone else had been there, someone she trusted enough to share a late-night coffee with. That small clue, along with a few bits of evidence under her fingernails, became the key that solved everything almost 50 years later. For decades, those little pieces sat quietly in an evidence box, forgotten by time, covered in dust. People moved on, new officers came and left, but the clues stayed waiting. They were small, but they never lost their truth. That's how life works too. The little things you do or try to hide never really disappear. They stay in the background, waiting for the right moment to reveal what really happened. One small mistake can open the door to a big discovery. And one tiny clue, like a fingerprint, a message, or a single strand of hair, can become the voice of justice years later. The detective who found the old evidence didn't know if it would help, but she didn't give up. She sent it to a new lab where better tools existed, machines that could see what the human eye couldn't. Inside that small evidence bag were answers everyone had been waiting for since the 1970s. And when the results came back, the truth finally spoke. The same man who had smiled at the world for decades was exposed by something smaller than a grain of sand, a few skin cells that refused to stay silent. That's the power of small things. They may be quiet, but they never lie. They don't fade or change their story. Even when people forget, even when the world stops caring, those little details still hold the truth. And when the time is right, they speak louder than a confession. In this case, science became the translator for those tiny voices. Every cell, every fiber, every old photo became part of a story that refused to die. What seemed invisible for 50 years became visible again through patience, faith, and careful work. And it all started because someone believed that even the smallest clue mattered. This shows why we should never ignore small details, not just in crimes but in life. Sometimes, a small word, a small act, or a small sign reveals more than we think. A quiet person in the background might know more than the one who talks the loudest. A single thing left behind can tell an entire story if someone pays attention. He thought he had erased his tracks perfectly. He wiped the cup, locked the door, and walked away thinking no one would ever know. But truth doesn't forget. It may sleep, but it never disappears. The small marks he tried to hide became the very hands that pointed straight at him years later. That's why every action, no matter how small, has a life of its own. You might forget it, but it doesn't forget you. And when the world finally looks close enough, even the tiniest clue becomes a voice that can speak after decades of silence. A voice that can bring justice to those who were wronged. A voice that says, "You thought I was nothing, but I was everything. So never ignore the little things." In the end, they are the ones that tell the biggest stories. Science is the memory of justice. For years, people thought the case was over. They said too much time had passed, too many files were lost, too many people had died. But what they didn't realize was that the answer was already there, quietly waiting inside a small glass tube in an evidence room. It wasn't just a piece of old evidence, it was a memory. A memory that didn't fade even when the world forgot. Science became the bridge between the past and the present. What human eyes couldn't see, technology could. What detectives in the 1970s couldn't prove, computers in the 2000s could uncover in minutes. That's what makes science so powerful. It doesn't feel tired, it doesn't grow old, and it doesn't lose hope. It remembers. When the investigators reopened the case, they carefully pulled out the old evidence, things that had been untouched for almost half a century. There were fingerprints, fibers, a scarf, and a small envelope with skin cells collected from under the victim's fingernails. Back then, these things meant very little. In those days, there was no DNA testing, no computers to compare samples, and no databases to store genetic information. All they could do was write reports, take photos, and pray that someday science would move forward enough to help them. And it did. Years later, new technology arrived, machines that could take something invisible to the human eye and turn it into proof. The detective in charge of the cold case believed that the evidence might still hold secrets, so she sent it to a modern lab. Those small skin cells, so small they could barely be seen under a microscope, became the key that opened a locked door from the past. Using DNA testing and genetic genealogy, scientists compared those cells to millions of records across the country. Bit by bit, they built a family tree of people who shared distant DNA links with the unknown killer. Each step brought them closer until finally one name matched perfectly. The man who thought his secret had died decades ago was suddenly exposed by a single microscopic trace of himself left behind. It was like the past itself had reached forward and tapped him on the shoulder. For nearly 50 years he believed he was safe. He watched investigators retire, watched the news grow quiet, watched life move on, but the truth was sitting in a freezer all along, waiting for the day science would wake it up. That's what makes science the memory of justice. Where human memory fails, science remembers. It doesn't forget like people do. It doesn't lose focus or emotion. It simply holds the facts, silently, until someone asks the right question. Science gives a voice to those who can no longer speak. It speaks for victims who were silenced, for families who spent decades waiting for answers. Every new invention, every test, every discovery becomes a light that shines into the dark corners where truth has been hiding. In this case, the evidence didn't just solve a murder, it restored faith. It showed that even when the world gives up, progress can bring justice back to life. It taught people that truth can survive inside a piece of cloth, a drop of blood, or a single hair, even longer than a lifetime. Science is not just machines and labs. It's the memory that never sleeps. It keeps records of what human hearts forget. It connects the present to the past, allowing justice to rise even after everyone thinks it's too late. The detective who solved the case once said, "It wasn't me, it was the evidence speaking." And that sip's true. Because science is not emotional, it's not biased, it only reveals what is. And what is cannot be hidden forever. When those lab results came back, and the truth was finally proven, it felt like time itself had spoken. Science had carried a message from 1971 all the way to 2019, a message that said, justice might take time, but it never dies. That's the beauty of it. While people change, memories fade, and witnesses forget, science keeps everything recorded quietly, waiting for the day it's called upon. And when that day comes, it doesn't whisper. It speaks clearly, powerfully, and truthfully. That is how a tiny cell, something smaller than a grain of dust, became the memory of a young woman's life and the proof that truth cannot stay buried. It waited nearly 5 decades for the world to catch up, and when it finally did, justice remembered her name. The power of a family that never gives up. The years after her death were filled with silence, but her family refused to let that silence win. While the world forgot, they remembered. Every birthday, every anniversary, every holiday, there was always an empty chair, a quiet reminder of the daughter who never came home. Most people would have given up after so many years, but not them. They carried her memory like a light in the dark, refusing to let it fade no matter how much time passed. Her mother, once full of energy and laughter, became the voice for justice. She wrote letters to police departments, to governors, to anyone who would listen. When new detectives came and old ones retired, she would call again to make sure they still had her daughter's file. She kept every news clipping, every note, and every photograph in boxes stacked neatly in the living room. To anyone else, it might have looked like clutter, but to her, it was all that was left of hope. She believed that one day someone would open those boxes and see what others had missed. Her father took it differently. He didn't talk much after it happened. The laughter that once filled their home became quiet. But silence doesn't always mean weakness. He showed his love in action, by keeping her things clean, by fixing her old bicycle every spring, by standing beside his wife at every court meeting, every police interview, every painful reminder. He carried his pain quietly, but his strength held the family together when grief tried to break them apart. And then there was her younger sister. She was just a teenager when her sister died. Most people expected her to grow bitter, to lose faith in the world. But she turned her pain into purpose. She studied law, became a prosecutor, and spent her life fighting for other victims who couldn't fight for themselves. Even though she couldn't work on her sister's case directly, every time she helped another family find justice, it was like she was keeping her sister's memory alive. That's what real love looks like. Not loud words, not anger, but quiet, steady faith that doesn't stop. Year after year, they faced disappointment. New detectives promised to look again. New reports came out, and still nothing changed. Yet every time they were told no, they came back again with "Please try one more time." That's easy to have hope when things are improving, but it takes true strength to have hope when nothing changes. That's what made this family powerful. They never stopped believing that the truth was still out there, waiting for someone to listen. They started a small community group to help other families who also had missing or unsolved cases. At first, it was just a few people sitting in their living room, sharing stories and tears. But slowly it grew. Their pain became a movement. They helped create new laws for better evidence storage, longer investigation timelines, and more funding for cold case units. Because of their fight, many other families found answers too. Even when her parents grew old and their hair turned gray, they never stopped asking, "What really happened to our daughter?" They believed that truth was not gone, just waiting. And in the end, they were right. It was their persistence that kept her case alive long enough for technology to catch up. If they had stayed quiet, if they had accepted defeat, the evidence might have been lost, and the killer might have died with his secret. But because they refused to give up, the truth was found. They proved that love is stronger than time. Their dedication turned pain into action, grief into courage, and silence into a voice that the world could finally hear. When the day finally came, when the detective knocked on their door to tell them, "We found him," it wasn't just a victory for one case. It was a victory for every parent who had ever cried in silence, for every family who had ever been told to move on. They didn't just get justice for their daughter, they gave hope to thousands of others still waiting. Their story shows that real strength isn't about power or revenge. It's about faith, patience, and love that never quits. Even when the world moves on, even when the nights feel endless, that kind of love keeps the flame of truth alive. Because justice doesn't only belong to the police or the courts. Sometimes it begins at home. In the hearts of families who keep asking questions, who keep remembering, who keep hoping long after everyone else has forgotten. That's the power of a family that never gives up. They remind us that even when it feels like everything is lost, love, real, patient, enduring love, can keep the truth alive until the day it finally comes home. A good name means nothing without a good heart. He was a man everyone respected. People spoke his name with pride. He was known as a teacher, a mentor, a kind neighbor, and a leader in his community. Parents trusted him with their children, students looked up to him, and everyone believed he was a symbol of goodness. He had a good name, the kind that opened doors, earned smiles, and made people feel safe. But what no one knew was that behind that good name lived a heart full of lies. For almost 50 years, he built a reputation so clean that even the idea of him doing something wrong felt impossible. He was invited to schools, events, and community meetings. He received awards, helped in charities, and gave speeches about honesty, education, and kindness. His words inspired people, yet they were spoken by a man who had taken an innocent life and buried the truth beneath decades of fake smiles. That's why a good name means nothing if the heart behind it isn't good. You can wear fancy clothes, have an important job, or be praised by others, but if your heart is corrupted, every good thing becomes meaningless. It's like decorating a house with lights while the inside is burning. From a distance it looks perfect, but up close, it's full of ashes. He thought reputation could protect him. He thought if he did enough good in front of people, no one would ever look deeper. And for a long time, he was right. He fooled everyone. Even the victim's family met him, shook his hand, and thanked him for helping with community projects. He stood next to them pretending to care, while knowing he was the reason for their pain. He spoke at memorial events, even donated money to a scholarship in the victim's name, all while hiding behind a mask of goodness. But no mask lasts forever. Because truth doesn't care about fame, age, or social position. It doesn't care how many people you've impressed or how long you've pretended to be kind. When truth comes, it looks straight into your heart, not your image. And when the heart is dirty, the name falls apart. When the truth about him finally came out, the same people who once respected him couldn't even say his name without disgust. Students tore down his photos from school walls. The town removed his name from the awards he'd received. His legacy, the one he spent his whole life building, disappeared overnight. All that was left was the truth he had tried to bury. It showed everyone that a good reputation built on lies is weaker than a single fact built on truth. Because real respect can't be bought or faked. It comes from doing the right thing when no one is watching. He had fooled the world, but not his own conscience. He lived in a beautiful lie, but the moment the truth came out, every bit of that beauty turned to dust. In life, many people care too much about how they look in front of others. They care about what people say, how many like them, how much praise they get. But character is not what people say about you. It's what you are when no one is around to see. It's how you treat people who can't give you anything. It's whether you stay honest even when lying would make life easier. The world saw him as a man of honor, but the truth revealed he was a man of dishonor wrapped in good manners. He lived two lives, one public and one private. The public one was filled with smiles and respect. The private one was haunted by guilt, lies, and fear. He thought he could keep the two separate forever. But when the truth came out, both worlds collided. And the man everyone thought was a hero became the villain of the story. His downfall taught the community something bigger than the crime itself. It reminded them that good deeds mean nothing when they're done for the wrong reasons. True goodness does not need an audience. It doesn't brag, it doesn't act, and it doesn't hide secrets. It lives quietly in the heart, showing itself through honesty, compassion, and sincerity. People who live for image may shine for a while, but their light is fake, like a candle in the wind. One strong truth can blow it out in an instant. But people with clean hearts, even if the world forgets their names, will always be remembered for their goodness. When he was finally arrested, all the awards, all the praise, all the love people gave him vanished. The town that once called him our most trusted man now whispered, "How could he?" And that's the power of truth. It strips away every layer of pretense and leaves only what's real. For him, that reality was ugly. That's a reminder for all of us. It doesn't matter how much the world praises you if your heart isn't pure. Because your name can be written on buildings, printed in newspapers, or spoken with respect. But if your heart is full of lies, your name will one day be remembered with shame. So build a good heart before you try to build a good name. Because a name fades when truth arrives, but a clean heart shines forever, even when no one is watching. Lies can last years, but not forever. He thought he had escaped. He thought the world had forgotten. Years turned into decades, and the story that once filled newspapers became just another old headline. He built a new life, earned people's trust, and convinced everyone that he was a man of honor. Every year that passed made him feel safer, like time itself had buried his secret forever. But lies are strange things. They can sleep for years, even for a lifetime, but they never die peacefully. Sooner or later, the truth wakes them up. After the murder, he cleaned everything carefully. He wiped fingerprints, hid the evidence, and locked the door. He made sure nothing pointed to him. And for a long time it worked. No one suspected him. He was questioned once, then cleared, and he walked away smiling, thinking he had fooled everyone. He went back to his job, to his family, to his quiet, respectable life. But every night, when the lights went off and silence filled the house, he knew the lie was still there, breathing softly, waiting. Lies are like shadows. You can run ahead of them for a while, but they follow you wherever you go. He moved through life pretending everything was fine, but every time someone mentioned her name, his stomach tightened. Every time he saw a police car, his heart skipped a beat. Every time a detective appeared on TV talking about old cases, he changed the channel quickly. He told himself that it was over, but deep down he knew it wasn't. The hardest part about living with a lie is pretending it doesn't exist. He smiled, laughed, taught, helped, donated, and became a role model. But the lie sat quietly behind every smile, watching him. And as he aged, the lie aged with him. It grew heavier, darker, more demanding. It whispered to him at night when he was alone. They shall find out one day. That's what lies do. They may give you comfort for a moment, but they always take your peace. They promise safety, but they steal sleep. They promise freedom, but they create fear. He lived in fear of his own past for nearly 50 years, afraid of a knock on the door, afraid of a question he couldn't answer, afraid of the truth finally catching up. But truth is patient. It doesn't rush. It waits quietly, gathering strength until the time is right to strike. And when it does, it doesn't just reveal the lie. It destroys everything built on top of it. For him, that moment came one ordinary morning. The same door he had walked through thousands of times now stood between him and the justice he had avoided for most of his life. When the officers arrived, he didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just sighed, as if he knew this day had always been coming. Because deep down he did know. Lies can run fast, but truth walks steady. And steady always wins. When the world learned who he really was, it wasn't just his secret that was uncovered. It was the collapse of everything he had built. His reputation, his respect, his friendships, gone in a heartbeat. The same people who once praised him now looked at him with disbelief. All those years of pretending vanished in seconds, leaving nothing but the truth he tried to bury. That's the nature of lies. They seem powerful when you're hiding behind them, but when light shines on them, they melt like snow under the sun. And no matter how old a lie becomes, it still carries the same weight it had on the day it was told. It doesn't fade with time. It waits for the truth to wake it up. In the end, his biggest mistake wasn't just taking a life, it was believing that he could cover it forever. He forgot that time doesn't erase sin, it exposes it. Every word he spoke, every false smile he gave was part of a story that was destined to break. The truth is like water. You can hold it down for a while, but it always finds a way to rise. Sometimes it seeps slowly through cracks. Sometimes it bursts like a flood, but it never disappears. And when it rises, it cleans everything in its path, washing away the lies no matter how long they've been there. When people saw him in handcuffs, they were shocked. Not because the truth came out, but because they realized it had been right in front of them all along. The same man they had trusted, respected, and loved had built his entire life on deception. That's what makes lies dangerous. They can live quietly in plain sight until the day truth demands payment. And when that day came, all the years he thought he'd gained were gone in a moment. He had lived freely for decades, but it meant nothing, because freedom built on lies is just another kind of prison. He was never truly free. Not even for a single day. This story shows that lies may last for years, but not forever. They can survive in silence, they can grow roots, they can fool a crowd, but they can't fool time. Truth doesn't chase lies, it lets them run ahead until they trip on their own weight. And when that happens, the truth steps forward, calm and certain, to take its place. Because no matter how long it takes, the truth always has the last word. Pain can create purpose. Pain changes people. It breaks them, shapes them, and sometimes it wakes something powerful inside them. When Catherine was taken, her family's world shattered. The laughter in their home faded, meals went cold on the table, and time seemed to stop. Every sound reminded them of her absence, the chair she used to sit on, the songs she loved, the smell of her favorite coffee. Pain filled every corner of their house, every minute of their lives. But that pain didn't just destroy them. It transformed them. At first, it was unbearable. Her mother couldn't teach piano anymore because every note reminded her of the daughter who used to hum in the next room. Her father, once full of energy and jokes, became quiet, spending hours staring at her old photos. Her younger sister cried every night, wondering why the world could be so cruel. They had every reason to give up, to let grief take over, to close their doors and disappear from the world. But they didn't sit. Instead, they turned their pain into purpose. Her mother decided that no other parent should suffer like she did. She started writing letters, calling officials, and speaking to lawmakers. People told her she was wasting her time, that cold cases don't get solved, that justice had already passed. But she didn't stop. She gathered other families who had lost their loved ones and gave them a voice when the system ignored them. What began as one mother's heartbreak became a movement for justice. Because of her, new laws were made, old cases were reopened, and new investigations began. Her pain became the seed of hope for others. Her father turned his pain into faith. He didn't talk much, but his actions spoke louder than words. He took care of his wife, supported her mission, and made sure his daughter's memory stayed alive in small ways. He repaired her bicycle every spring, even though no one would ever ride it again. He polished her school trophies every year as if she had just won them. To outsiders, it might have looked like denial, but to him it was love. That was how he kept her spirit alive. And her sister, the little girl who once sat by her sister's bed watching her study, grew up carrying that pain in her heart. But instead of letting it turn to bitterness, she let it guide her. She studied law and became a prosecutor. Every case she fought, every victim she represented was a silent tribute to her sister. She couldn't fight for her own family's justice, but she made sure others would never be forgotten like Catherine was. Her pain became her mission. That's the thing about pain. It gives you two choices: to let it destroy you or to let it build something new inside you. And this family chose the second. They used their sorrow to create something meaningful. Their strength turned darkness into light. They proved that even the deepest wounds can grow flowers if you water them with faith and purpose. For nearly 50 years, they kept going when everyone else stopped caring. Every anniversary, they lit candles. Every time the news covered another cold case, they prayed that maybe one day it would be hers. Every disappointment made them stronger. They didn't see their fight as pain anymore, they saw it as purpose. And in the end, that purpose paid off. Their endless love and persistence kept the case alive long enough for science to catch up, for truth to finally speak. Their pain became the bridge between tragedy and justice. When the day of the arrest came, it wasn't just the end of a crime, it was the reward of 50 years of faith. When people saw the mother, now in her 90s, hearing the words, "We found him," they cried, not just because justice was done, but because they saw what pain can do when it's guided by love. That woman could have spent her life in grief, but instead, she spent it building something that changed lives far beyond her own. Her pain became her power. It turned her from a victim's mother into a warrior for truth. It gave her a voice that spoke not just for her daughter, but for hundreds of other forgotten souls. That's the beauty hidden in tragedy, that even the deepest suffering can become a source of strength when it's faced with faith and courage. Pain will visit all of us in some form, through loss, betrayal, or disappointment. But what matters is what we do with it. We can either let it harden our hearts, or let it teach us compassion. We can either let it destroy our hope, or let it ignite our purpose. This family story reminds us that pain doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something extraordinary. Sometimes, the things that break you are the same things that awaken your greatest strength. And sometimes, the purpose you find through pain doesn't just heal you, it heals others too. That's how pain becomes purpose. Not by removing the hurt, but by turning it into hope. By making sure that no one else has to walk the same lonely road. By turning heartbreak into change. And by proving that even in the darkest stories, something beautiful can still rise. Silent work can change the world. The people who finally solved this case weren't famous detectives on TV or loud heroes looking for attention. They were quiet professionals, scientists, investigators, and researchers, working behind the scenes while the world moved on. No spotlight, no applause, no big speeches. Just patience, persistence, and silent work that changed everything. While everyone thought the case was forgotten, a small group of people kept studying old files, reviewing faded photos, and testing pieces of evidence that most had given up on. They didn't instead do it for fame. They did it because they believed that every story deserves an ending, no matter how long it takes. When they reopened the box that had been sealed for almost 50 years, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. Just a detective at her desk, carefully unpacking old evidence, reading handwritten notes from the 1970s, and whispering, "Let's try again." She worked long hours alone, while others slept, scanning papers, labeling samples, comparing old fingerprints, and sending tiny pieces of evidence for modern DNA testing. No one outside the department even knew what was happening. But her silence was full of purpose. That's how real change often begins, not with noise but with quiet, steady effort. While the world forgets, some people keep working. They don't post about it, they don't brag, and they don't expect recognition. They simply do what sips right because it matters. The detective who took over the case decades later didn't know Catherine personally. She wasn't said even born when the crime happened. But when she read through the old reports, she felt a responsibility not just to solve a mystery but to honor a promise made long before her time. A promise that justice should never expire. She believed in something simple yet powerful. The truth is still there, we just have to listen carefully enough to find it. So, she digitized thousands of documents, sorted through decades of forgotten notes, and contacted experts in DNA and forensic genealogy, a field that didn't even exist when the crime was committed. And she did it quietly. There were no news articles, no interviews, no attention, just faith that even old evidence still has a voice. It took years of quiet work, but that silence became the key that opened the door to justice. The scientists in the lab who extracted DNA from a tiny piece of evidence didn't shout when they found results. They simply recorded the data, double-checked it, and sent it forward. The genealogist who built the family tree that led to the suspect spent months tracing generations of names, searching through records, and connecting dots no one else had seen. Each of them played a small part, but together their quiet efforts formed a chain strong enough to break 50 years of silence. That's the beauty of silent work. It doesn't need to be seen to be powerful. It's the late-night studying, the extra hours, the focus when no one's watching. It's the kind of work that changes lives without noise. When the arrest finally happened, the world saw the headlines, "Cold case solved after 48 years." People praised the detectives, the technology, and the breakthrough. But what the world didn't see was all the small, quiet steps that made that moment possible. The uncelebrated nights, the unnoticed effort, the belief that justice was still worth chasing even when no one was watching. Every great change in history began that way, in silence. The cure for diseases, the inventions that save lives, the peace treaties that end wars, all started with people working quietly, often alone, believing that what they were doing mattered even if no one else noticed yet. That's what this case reminds us of. You don't have to be loud to make an impact. You don't need a crowd to validate your effort. Real strength is often silent. The most powerful people are not always the ones speaking the most. They're the ones doing the most. The detective who reopened the case didn't chase attention. She didn't try to become famous. She simply did her job with heart. And because of her silent effort, an entire family finally got answers after half a century of waiting. She didn't just solve a crime, she restored faith in justice. That's the power of quiet dedication. While noise fades, silent work endures. While applause dies, real results remain. You may not always see the results of your effort right away. You may feel unseen, unnoticed, unappreciated. But just like that detective, your persistence is building something. It might take years for the world to notice, but the moment will come when your silence speaks louder than 1,000 voices. So keep going. Keep doing your part even when no one claps for you. Keep giving your best even when no one says thank you. Because one day that small effort, that quiet act of faith, might be the thing that changes someone's world. Just like those investigators, scientists, and family members, you might not see the full impact of your work right away. But one day when truth finally rises, your silent work will stand tall as the reason justice arrived. And that's the message this story leaves behind. That sometimes the most powerful noise in the world is silence filled with purpose. Justice may come late, but it comes sure. Justice is slow, sometimes painfully slow. It doesn't always arrive when we want it to. It doesn't always come in the way we expect. But when it does come, it comes with the kind of power that shakes the soul. For almost 50 years, the Fitzgerald family waited. They waited through tears, through disappointments, through birthdays that felt empty and holidays that felt cold. Each year, they watched the world move forward while their own hearts stayed trapped in 1971. Detectives retired, new ones took over, and still, no answers. Some nights her mother sat by the window long after midnight, whispering prayers that the world had stopped hearing. But Allah, destiny, justice, whatever you call it, never forgets. It just waits for the right time. Every time the police called with no updates, her mother thanked them anyway. Every time reporters stopped calling, she still wrote letters to newspapers. Every time people told her to move on, she smiled politely and didn't. Because she knew that justice delayed is not justice denied. It's just justice on a longer road. When the detective reopened the case decades later, the world had changed completely. Phones, computers, technology, everything was new. But the truth was still sitting there, quietly, inside an old box of evidence, waiting for someone to care again. The scarf, the coffee cup, the tiny samples that once meant nothing, all of them had been preserved through time, like the universe itself had protected them for this exact moment. And when the DNA results came back, after almost half a century, it was as if time finally exhaled. The waiting, the tears, the prayers, they all met that single moment of truth. The knock on the door, the words, "We found him." 50 years of silence broken by 5 words that changed everything. That's how justice works sometimes. It doesn't move fast. It doesn't rush. It lets the guilty live with their secrets long enough to build their own prisons. Because the longer they run, the heavier their lies become. Justice gives them time, not to escape, but to destroy themselves slowly with guilt. When the truth finally came, the man who once thought he had beaten the system was now 78 years old. Old, tired, gray-haired, but still carrying the same darkness in his soul. He thought time had washed his sins away, but time had only been sharpening justice's blade. When the officers came to his door, he didn't even resist. He just lowered his head, like a man who knew this day had been walking toward him for 50 years. The same man who once stood proudly in classrooms teaching others about right and wrong now stood in handcuffs, surrounded by the people he had fooled. The same community that once celebrated him now looked at him with disgust and disbelief. His legacy, gone. His honor, gone. Everything he had built to hide the truth collapsed in a single morning. That's the beauty and certainty of justice. It might not knock early, but when it does, it knocks hard. It doesn't come for revenge, it comes for balance. For every tear shed, for every sleepless night, for every prayer whispered into the dark, justice keeps count. The Fitzgerald family had waited so long that even time began to forget. The mother grew old. The father passed away before seeing the truth. The sister grew gray, holding on to faith that maybe one day she'd know who took her sister away. And when it finally happened, she didn't cry in anger. She cried in peace. Because she understood something deeper. Justice had its own clock. And when that clock strikes, nothing can stop it. She said, "It didn't come when we wanted, but it came exactly when it was meant to." Those words carry the weight of every person who's ever waited for truth. Sometimes justice waits until technology catches up. Sometimes it waits until the right heart cares enough to try again. And sometimes it waits until the guilty person's mask is so heavy that they can't hold it anymore. When the truth was finally revealed, the case didn't just close. It taught an entire community that time cannot protect a lie forever. You can grow old, you can change jobs, you can move cities, but you can't move away from the truth. It travels with you, quietly, patiently, waiting for the right day to speak. And when justice finally arrives, it doesn't come quietly. It comes with the weight of every moment it was delayed. It comes for the victim, for the family, for the community, for everyone who ever believed that truth still matters. The courtroom was filled that day. Reporters, students, old friends, and even those who once admired the man now stood watching the truth unfold. The detective who solved the case sat silently, her eyes wet, not from pride but from relief. She had done what countless others could not. She had given time a voice. The judge read the sentence. The man who thought he was safe forever was led away in chains. And for the first time in 50 years, Catherine's name was spoken not as a mystery but as a victory. Her story didn't end in tragedy. It ended in justice. Justice doesn't forget. It may be delayed by years, decades, even lifetimes, but it never disappears. It may walk slowly, but it never stops walking. And when it finally reaches its destination, it brings peace that no lie, no delay, and no darkness can ever take away. So if you're still waiting for truth, don't lose faith. Justice moves at its own pace, but it never loses its way. It may come late, but when it comes sure, strong, and unstoppable. And when it does, the truth that once whispered in silence will finally roar for all the world to hear. The courtroom doors closed, but the echoes of that day still lingered, soft, heavy, unforgettable. Outside, the winter air was cold, but it carried something warm: peace. For the first time in half a century, the Fitzgerald family didn't go home with questions. They went home with answers. The mother, who had spent a lifetime praying for this day, passed away soon after, quietly in her sleep, as if her soul had been waiting for justice before letting go. Her daughter, the sister who had turned pain into strength, stood by her grave and whispered, "We did it, Kathy. We kept our promise." Tears fell, not of sadness, but of completion. And the man who thought he could hide from truth spent his last days behind bars, surrounded not by awards or admiration, but by silence. The same silence he had forced on another life so long ago. For him, time had stopped mattering. But for her family, time finally started moving again. The town that once spoke of the case in whispers now spoke of it with reverence, not for the crime, but for the courage it inspired. Students who never knew Catherine now visit the small memorial garden where her dorm once stood. They leave flowers, notes, and quiet prayers. Because her story isn't just about death, it's about truth that refused to die. In that garden, the wind moves gently through the trees, and if you listen closely, it almost sounds like peace breathing again. The same peace that took 50 years to return. The same peace that reminds every soul, no matter how long darkness lasts, light always finds a way through. Justice came late, but it came sure. And when it did, it didn't just close a case. It opened hearts, restored faith, and proved something timeless. You can silence a voice, but not a truth. You can delay justice, but not deny it. Because truth, like dawn after the longest night, will always rise. And as the screen fades to black, one quiet line remains. For every story buried in time, there sits a truth still waiting to be heard.